Welcome back into Live Now from Fox. So we're turning our attention now to a bizarre story and investigation coming out of Marion County, Florida, and more particularly in Ocala, Florida. Take a look at this, a social media post by our partners at Fox 35 in Orlando. It says an Ocala man accused of killing a UK woman who was reported missing last month pleaded not guilty on Tuesday. But here is where this story gets a little strange. So according to records, the woman allegedly met the man on a website where she was looking for someone to apparently torture and ultimately kill her. Authorities identified the woman as Sonia Exelby. Her body was found buried in a shallow grave at a home in Marion Oaks 1 week after she boarded a flight to Florida. Dwayne Hall, the suspect who you see pictured there, has been arrested, charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder in Exelby's death. Joining us now to discuss this even further as it heads to trial is a criminal defense attorney, John Day. John, good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Of course. Good morning to you as well. So as a criminal defense attorney, what goes through your mind when you hear, or let's say you get a client that brings this argument to you, that he actually did what the victim wanted in this case, which was ultimately kill her?
Yeah, well, as you said, a bizarre and tragic and troubling story involving a young woman with some clear mental health issues, and a history of that in England, where she was treated for this, apparently. But in this kind of a case, Florida does not have what's called an assisted suicide law, and this is the farthest thing from that. This is simply alleged to be a murder with some kidnapping and possible sexual assault charges involved. And I mean, this is sort of the last case you'd ever really want to defend as a criminal defense lawyer. I'm a former prosecutor, and so of course your mind goes to how would this case be prosecuted first, and is there a defense? I mean, technically, yes, you can argue that the parties agreed to this and that there was some type of something in there that would reduce it from, a planned murder to something else. But man, this is going to be one of the hardest cases you could have to defend. I mean, it's just so horrible. The facts are so horrible. Clearly, a young woman who's ill, who's mentally ill, finds a guy online who's willing to do these horrible things to her, and he's facing the worst possible punishment in the state of Florida. So would not want to defend. The short answer is no, I would not want to defend this case, even though that's what I do for a living.
And when talking a little bit about this defense, what kind of evidence would have to be presented for this defense to even go through and for this person to get acquitted? Because it can't just be a he said, she said kind of thing. He's facing some very serious charges.
Yeah, there's a long and apparently very complete paper trail involving, and it's not literally paper, it's digital, but communications between them. There's some video that was recovered by law enforcement that he apparently tried to delete that shows her, it looks like in captivity with some bruising, a lot of bruising on her face and on her body. So there's a huge amount of evidence stacked up against this defendant that shows that even though a obviously mentally ill woman engaged with him and said, I want you to torture me and kill me because, and again, this is so sad. In her words, she said, I'm a bad person. I deserve this. I mean, clearly this is someone who needs help, but this guy is alleged to have agreed, okay, if you pay me, you come to Florida, I'll do these horrible things to you and I'll kill you. And then there's a number of things, a number of steps he apparently took after this death, after the murder, that link him back to it, including a knife that was mailed 6 months later, apparently, to a family member that has her blood on it. So the amount of evidence against him is pretty overwhelming. That's why a judge in this case has kept this defendant in custody, saying the evidence against you is so strong and it wouldn't be safe to let you out on any kind of a bond.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that because I did want to point out that he was denied bond, so he will remain in jail until this goes to trial. You mentioned a little bit earlier, John, that Florida doesn't have this concept of assisted suicide. So right there, this case, I mean, this is tough to defend, but have you ever heard of a case like this, maybe in the past, where let's say a suspect it was proven that they assisted a victim with the ending of their own life and they were actually acquitted of those charges of, let's say, murder and manslaughter?
Yeah, there have been cases, it's pretty rare, but there have been cases in states or jurisdictions where this is sort of a a fuzzy area where the idea is, and it's usually medical personnel who are engaged in some kind of a mercy situation. That's the farthest thing from this case, because this guy, I mean, she finds him online on apparently some kind of a fetish website, and she's engaging with him, communicating with him, and he takes her up on this offer. So it's the farthest thing in the world from, there are some jurisdictions, some states that do have legal assisted euthanasia, assisted suicide laws, but there's a really specific and detailed procedure you have to go through in those states. I mean, this is not just something that happens in a vacuum. In this case, that's exactly what it is. There's no law in Florida that allows this, that allows someone to consent to be murdered like that. That's why it's just so horrible. And overlying the whole thing is the fact that she's clearly mentally ill. Apparently, a couple of years ago, she was treated. She had the same sort of issue come up in the UK, and she was treated. And I believe her treatment people thought she was in a better place, but obviously this thing resurfaced. It came back, and now you've got a guy who's looking at the ultimate punishment in Florida for agreeing online to do this horrible act.
Finally, John, just one more question, even on that point that you just made here, because yes, it was back apparently in 2024, law enforcement in the UK, they had said that the victim in this case tried to hire someone to end her life. Then the attempt was thwarted. She got treatment instead. How important is that going to be to this case, or is this just a point that it's not even worth arguing because I mean, the charges are so heavy. And again, this happened in Florida. I mean, how important is that? And ultimately, what do you think is going to be the conclusion for the suspect in this?
Well, nothing looks good for the defendant in this case. Obviously, the amount of evidence against him is pretty overwhelming. And again, you can't consent to travel to the state of Florida to be murdered. And it sounds like there's so much detailed evidence, digital as well as other physical evidence, that links him to this, the communications between them. So obviously, he's not in a very good position to even try to get an acquittal. Whether this goes to trial or not, whether this winds up with a plea, who knows? But I mean, at the end of the day, it just highlights the fact that someone who's engaged, who's undergoing that kind of a mental breakdown, that kind of a mental illness, you can't consent to this kind of a treatment. And this guy, obviously, according to law enforcement, was certainly well aware of what the situation was. So doesn't look good for him. Tragic for this young woman and her family.
Ultimately, very tragic. John Day, criminal defense attorney, we do appreciate your time joining us here to break down this case. We'll see if it heads to trial. Any new developments, we'll be checking in with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And as John had mentioned multiple times, this case did have to do with, unfortunately, just a tragic circumstance for the victim in this case. Some mental health issues were part of this entire situation. So I just want to point this out on your screen here. If you or someone you know is experiencing mental health concerns, help is available. Remember, you can contact or text 911 for emergencies. You can also dial 988 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You can also text or chat online with any of those mental health resources that are available. So again, that hotline is 988. We'll be right back.